Hello, dear students. Today's lecture is based on Emma by Jane Austen. Jane Austen, a born storyteller, surprises us by her faithful observation, exquisite perfection, humorous and ironic presentation, and exactness of structure and a deep insight of human nature. She is not concerned in her writing with great upheaval or turmoil of the age like French Revolution, Industrial Revolution. She is concerned more with everyday life, with everyday needs. Confrontations occur in her novel in day-to-day life because faulty human nature. What she cherished, the beauty of a serene family life, and she promoted family values, the limited life of provincial British society. The novel Emma is a story of a flawed and self-deceived heroine who finally comes to a state of true self-awareness. Emma has paid for her delusive self-confidence by truly painful experiences, humiliations. Emma is confident enough she can mold the people, their life, but she misapplies her sense and suffers. These two quotes by George Knightley in the novel aptly brings forth the fault of Emma, her error of judgment. Knightley opposes Emma's interference in the life of the people. So he says, it was foolish, it was wrong to take so active part in bringing any two people together. And he says, like if people are misapplying their sense, it's better not to have sense. In that way, better be without sense than misapply it as you do. It is because of Emma's faulty nature, Jane Austen made a comment that I'm going to take a heroine here in this novel whom no one but myself will much like. But let's see what are the good qualities for which we like the heroine despite her faults. Emma remains a classic 2 centuries since it was first published. In its praise, Ronald Blythe writes, Emma is the climax of Jane Austen's genius and the Parthenon of fiction. The Irish poet Thomas Moore wrote in similar vein. He described Emma as the very perfection of novel writing. Sir Walter Scott, a contemporary of Jane Austen, he praised her for presenting with utmost sincerity and exactness her little world. So the critics are of the opinion the world which she presents, that is very little, the range is little, but what she gives, that's very grand. Sir Walter Scott opines about Austen, she surprises us with her knowledge about the world. The subjects are not often elegant and certainly never grand, but they are finished up to nature and with a precision which delights the reader. Emma is fourth novel by Jane Austen. The first three are Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and the fourth one is Emma. It was published in 3 volumes in 1815. Set in Highbury, a small village, England, in the early 19th century, the novel is really about the formation and development of the character of its heroine, Emma Woodhouse. Her misplaced confidence in her matchmaking abilities occasions several romantic misadventures. The genre of the novel, it is novels of manners. A novel of manners is a novel that describes in detail the customs, behaviors, habits and expectations of a certain social group, especially of higher class, when it makes fun of these manners to entertain or to teach. Austen has here applied some techniques and themes of comedy of manners and of comedy of errors. Comedy of manners with a host of comedic characters and a plot that is based on deception, misunderstanding, courtship and marriage. Comedy of errors refers to a situation in which many mistakes are made that are funny and arouse generally because of failure to understand and comprehend the situation and people. The tone of the novel is ironic, satirical. She satirizes the faults of the heroines and of other characters, but Austen is always presenting her faults or her shortcomings through sympathetic tone. Setting, it is early 19th century. The scene of the novel is Highbury, a large and populous village 16 miles from London. Then we have some other important places which are been mentioned. Hartfield. It is owned by the Woodhouse family. The heart of the novel, the heroine Emma lives in Hartfield. Donwell Abbey, it is a estate that is owned by Mr. Knightley. Randall's estate, Mr. Weston is owner of a house that is called Randall's. Then we have Box Hill, where the picnic has taken place and the scene gets changed from this place. Enscombe, where Frank lives with his aunt and uncle. The river, Mole, Richmond, Weymouth and other places. In the very first sentence of the novel, Jane Austen introduces the title character as Emma Woodhouse, who is a 21-year-old daughter of a wealthy gentleman. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence. Best blessings means to say that what the people can expect or require in the life that can be considered as a blessings, which this heroine has. Comfortable life, well, safe, secured life, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. So she is actually facing no problem. She is wealthy, she is having beauty, a life which is well secured, comfortable life. Emma's main job is to be a companion of her widower father, Mr. Henry Woodhouse, a valetudinarian, means who is always anxious for himself, self-obsessed man. Mr. Woodhouse is always anxious about his health, about his life. He is keen on gruel, interested in eating and enjoying a very comfortable life, quite worldly life. He always resists any kind of change that may disturb his routine life or can take away the comforts from his life, compensating somewhat for his selfish whims by being kindly and concerned about people's health. So even if he inquires the health of the people or do something for them, it's because he is actually interested in himself. He has created a spider web of flattery, a narcissistic cocoon that denies the reality of generational change and loss within which Emma is psychologically trapped. Emma is kind to her father. She sincerely takes care of him. She is in vain of her own perceptions. She is self-deceived heroine of the novel who is very much accustomed to having her own way and has a disposition to think a little too well of herself. This was the evil in her life, that she has no way or nobody to stop her. She does what she feels right. As says the narrator, the real evils indeed of Emma's situation were the power of having rather too much her own way. Everybody dotes her, appreciates her, whatever she does, nobody makes any question. That's why she has grown conceited, because she can do what she wants. So having rather too much her own way and a disposition to think a little too well of herself. She has a high perception about herself. These were the disadvantages, a kind of a curse in disguise, that there is nobody who stops her or who questions her the way a life, sheltered cocoon life she was living, which threatened allowed to her many enjoyments. The danger, however, was at present so unperceived that they did not by any means rank as misfortunes with her. To have her own way actually created a kind of misfortune for her. She gets a kind of supreme self-confidence, and that serves wrong way to her. Emma believes that she is an excellent matchmaker, as she tells her father and her dear friend Mr. Knightley. She practically arranged the recent marriage between her former governess and friend Miss Taylor and the widower Mr. Weston. She did after all introduce them. After such a clear success, Emma is determined to make another match. Mr. Knightley scolds Emma when she takes credit of bringing or matching Miss Taylor or Mr. and Mr. Weston. This successful union was just a mere guess from her part. So Knightley says, I think it would be a very good thing for Miss Taylor if Mr. Weston were to marry her. And saying it again to yourself every now and then afterwards, why do you talk of success? Where is your merit? What are you proud of? You made a lucky guess, and that's all that can be said. A straightforward, open-hearted man like Weston and a rational, unaffected woman like Miss Taylor may be safely left to manage their own concern. You are more likely to have done harm to yourself than good to them by interference. Knightley is of the opinion that both Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston are mature and capable enough to handle their life. By interfering in their life, Emma has brought problems for herself. Emma thinks it is she who has brought these two people together. Now she is determined to make another match. This time she has set her sights on the village vicar, Mr. Elton. George Knightley gets angry because he thinks this man is mature enough to choose his own way. Mr. George Knightley is Emma's brother-in-law. and the Woodhouse's trusted friend and advisor. He is the only character who is openly critical of Emma, pointing out her flaws and foibles with frankness. Mr. Knightley, in fact, was one of the few people who could see faults in Emma Woodhouse, and the one only who ever told of her of them. And though this was not particularly agreeable, she didn't like it, because nobody ever opposes her. So it's not agreeable to Emma herself. She knew it would be so much less so to her father, that she would not have him really suspect such a circumstances as her not being thought perfect by everybody. Emma meets a pretty but silly girl of 17, Miss Harriet, a boarding school girl without family or fortune, the natural daughter of somebody. Emma takes upon herself the responsibility of managing the life of Harriet. Emma continued to invite Harriet to Hartfield and thus succeeded in finding a new good friend to help her get over Mrs. Weston's departure. She's been brought up after her mother's death by Miss Taylor, and now this lady has married to Mr. Weston. She is now alone. So this girl, Harriet, is a kind of compensation, a kind of a company in absence of Mrs. Weston. In chapter 5th, while talking to Mrs. Weston, the former governess of Emma, Mr. Knightley, a far-sighted man, disapproves the relationship between Emma and Harriet. He says, "I don't know what your opinion may be, Mrs. Weston," said Mr. Knightley, "of this great intimacy between Emma and Harriet Smith, but I think it a bad thing. It is a shock for Mrs. Weston. She enjoys this friendship." But Mr. Knightley didn't like it. Why? Because he says, "I think they will neither of them do the other any good." And he proved right. One, Harriet, who became very submissive and who dotes or attached her means Emma great importance and does whatever she says. So Harriet flatters Emma, and Emma, she uses her power on Harriet. With this relationship, neither Harriet nor Emma is going to gain anything. Harriet clearly has feelings for Robert, a local farmer, and Robert for her, a shock for Emma. That shows her snobbishness. She cannot like a person who is below her status, a common farmer. Emma was dismayed to discover that Harriet had developed feelings for Robert Martin, a farmer who lived near Donwell Abbey, whose family is renting land from Mr. Knightley. She thought the match and relation between Martin and Harriet generally unsuitable. Under Emma's direction, Harriet refuses Robert Martin's proposal so that Emma can engineer one from Mr. Elton, the vicar. Emma makes the guess that Harriet's family must be a very high family. She must belongs to higher society, and so she convinces Harriet that Robert is beneath her. This shows Emma's social snobbery. Now we are introduced another character, Mr. Elton, a proud, conceited and superficial man. Emma, when she intervenes into the matter of Harriet and misguides her, she's been criticized openly by Mr. Knightley. Mr. Knightley criticizes Emma for interfering. Why? Because he knows Robert and he knows that he is a gentleman. Claiming Robert is a respectable man, a good match for Harriet. It is Emma's error of judgment that she regards Harriet suitable for Mr. Elton despite the obscurity of Harriet's birth and her perceived inferior social status. Emma is actually misguided by her imagination in the understanding of various characters and their behavior, such as she cannot understand the motives that guide Mr. Elton's behavior because she imagines that he is in love with Harriet. Unluckily, Mr. Elton misunderstands the intrigues and believes Emma is interested in him for herself. Mr. Elton can be compared with Mr. Collins of Pride and Prejudice, or he belongs to the race of those people who are always very conscious about their class and they are choosing marriage as a means to elevate their social status. So he cannot be lowered to consider Harriet Smith. George Knightley was aptly able to judge the behavior of Mr. Elton, and he warns Emma that Mr. Elton is in love with her. Emma was unable to believe it because she was planning a marriage between Harriet and Elton. So she says, "Mr. Elton, in love with me? What an idea." Knightley says, "I don't say it so, but you will do well to consider whether it is so or not and to regulate your behavior accordingly. I think your manners to him encouraging. I speak as a friend, Emma. You had better look about you and ascertain what you do and what you mean to do." Knightley's evaluation about Mr. Elton's behavior was right. He reveals to Emma that he is in love with her. After a Christmas party at Randall's, Emma and Mr. Elton were forced into a carriage together, and Mr. Elton confessed his love for Emma. Emma was shocked by this, inquiring if he had drunkenly mistaken her for Harriet. Mr. Elton was likewise shocked at this suggestion, exclaiming that he and Miss Smith are of two different levels. Emma, with unpardonable arrogance, proposed to arrange everybody's destiny. Her illusions and misconceptions about Mr. Elton, wrong notion about Mr. Martin's worth, and Harriet's parentage family background, created trouble for everyone. Elton made it clear to Emma that whatever attention he had paid to Harriet, it was on Emma's account. He said he could never think of lowering himself by marrying a girl like Harriet because Harriet didn't belong to the same social level as he is. Humiliated by Emma's attempt to pair him with Harriet, Mr. Elton resolves to retire to Bath. Emma is forced to tell Harriet about Mr. Elton and spends the next several days consoling her. While she cried heavily at the news, she bore the intelligence very well, blaming nobody. At this point, we are introduced with two characters, Jane Fairfax and Mr. Frank Churchill. Jane Fairfax, she is the beautiful orphaned niece of Emma's neighbor, Miss Betts. She is actually equal or to certain extent better than Emma in accomplishment and beauty. But she is not a fortunate girl like Emma. She is an orphan and taken care by her aunt, later on Miss Bates. So through Miss Bates or through Jane Fairfax, the writer is narrating the predicament of spinster women. The misfortune of women who lack fortune is revealed especially through Jane Fairfax. If Jane does not wed, she must become a governess because she lacks any money of her own. Initially, Emma dislikes Jane. She condemns her for being too cold and too cautious. Mr. Knightley defends Jane, reminding Emma that whereas she is privileged, Jane has no fortune and must soon leave to work as a governess. Now, the another character, Frank Churchill, he is the dashing young son of Mr. Weston from his first wife. Frank Churchill, Mr. Weston's and Mrs. Weston's stepson. Frank Churchill lives at Enscombe with his aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Churchill. He is considered a potential suitor for Emma, but she learns that though Frank is attractive, charming and clever, he is also irresponsible, deceitful, rash and ultimately unsuited to her. Appearance can be deceptive. It's been shown through Frank Churchill, who is employing various ways to attract Emma, and these ways are actually to hide his relationship, his engagement with Jane Fairfax. He can be compared with Wickham in Pride and Prejudice to a certain extent. The people who appear very cordial, agreeable, but actually they are manipulative. What is going on in their mind, it is very difficult to guess. Emma's initial interest in Frank does not last. First she thinks she also loves this man, but later on she realizes no, she is not in love with this man. After a while, she begins to imagine him as a potential match for Harriet. And now see her snobbery. When a man is not suitable for her, she immediately thinks that this man is suitable for her friend. When Harriet confesses her love for a man of a higher social status, Emma assumes she means Frank. Again, it is her deception, her illusion. Emma suffers humiliation. It's because of her illusion. It's because of her interference, and here it is her illusion. As it turns out, Harriet is in love with Mr. Knightley, who at a recent village ball saved her from the embarrassment of being snubbed by Mr. Alton and his new wife. Suddenly, Emma realizes that she too loves Mr. Knightley. She realizes that if she had let Harriet marry Robert, she might have avoided this whole mess, and thus the denouement begins. Not long after Harriet's confession, Frank makes a hasty departure from Highbury. As he later explains in a letter to Emma, he and Jane have secretly been engaged all along. Emma felt hurt because till now he was using Emma. He was pretending as if he is in love to hide his engagement. His flirtation with Emma was just a ruse, a way to buy time until his relatives agreed to his marriage with Jane. Emma and Mr. Knightley discuss this surprise turn of events. To Mr. Knightley's surprise, Emma confesses that she never loved Frank. Mr. Knightley, in response, professes his love for Emma. She is overjoyed and they implicitly agreed to be married. The novel thus concludes with 3 marriages, happy ending, Jane and Fair, Frank, Harriet and Robert, and Emma and Mr. Knightley. The novel is a comical book largely about Emma's errors of judgment. Emma is generally well intentioned. She has her fault, but she, if wants to bring Harriet and Mr. Elton together, she did it not with wrong intention. So her intention is very right. And one very surprising thing in this heroine is here, she is not much concerned about her romantic affairs. Rather, she is interested in romantic affairs of the other people. Her hobby throughout the novel is matchmaking. Now a question comes why she is interested in other people's affair. She is having a brilliant brain, better than other family members. But the women, they are not getting exposure. They are not getting an outlet of this knowledge. They are not allowed to go out. And because of this reason, they have to use this brain in somewhere or the other way. So she uses her knowledge, her power in helping the people. Now question comes, at times the people fail to know the difference between interfering and helping. So her help at times, because of her lack of knowledge, lack of farsightedness, becomes kind of interference in the life of the people. The novel is essentially the story of how Emma matures, her development, her progress from illusion to reality, from a clever young woman to a more modest and considerate woman, able to accept the idea of love. At the end, Emma learns from her mistakes. She progresses from a proud girl to one who is mentally more balanced, from a callous girl to one who has become sympathetic, from a girl of rash and hasty judgment to one who has become sober and mature. And because of this change in her attitude, temperament and approach, we like this heroine. Because we are aware with this fact, to err is human. The people, because of their lack of farsightedness, immaturity or lack of practical knowledge, lack exposure to world, they do make mistakes. They make some errors in their judgment, in their evaluation of the people. But if they have a good heart, they are ready to change, then this fault can be forgiven. So that is the case with Emma. At times she behaves like a snob, at times she is rude, but at the end she is a changed lady. And initially she rejects the sound advice of Mr. Knightley, but later on she realizes and she tries to matures herself, she tries to correct herself. Thank you, student. We will meet again in the second part of this lecture.